So your program is just for any of you who may have arrived late. The first speaker listed after lunch is Sean Tierney. If any of you arrived late, you missed it. Too bad. We moved. It was real good. You should feel bad. So in fact, the first speaker after lunch is going to be Chrystia Chudczak, who's going to talk to us. She is the Chief Design Officer at the University of Ottawa. She's a former senior executive in the Government of Canada and an international trade negotiator. And the mom of 4 boys, 3 of whom play elite hockey in Ottawa at the AAA Major Pee-wee, under-18, junior A levels. She's a Hockey Canada certified coach 1 and 2, and yes, a Leafs fan. Take it away.
Okay, so I'm double fisting today. I'm not used to doing it this way, so bear with me if I make a few mistakes. And don't judge me about the Leafs. I live with 5 men plus a male golden retriever, so I have no choice in life. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a very unscientific experiment I did in the last 20 days to prepare for this conference. And we're going to focus on getting data analytics right for minor hockey. So let's get into it. So I'm going to talk to you about what I think the problem is, what I did, what I heard, what I believe, and what I think should happen next. So for me, the problem is really quite straightforward. A data analytics tsunami is bearing down on minor hockey. Some see it, no one understands what it means. Like, who is protecting this child in this system? Said a manager of a competitive team to me in the last 2 weeks. So here's what I did, and you won't see a lot of numbers in this presentation. First of all, I figured this is a design problem. Design thinking involves problems using empathy and creative tools and solving them. It involves engaging an ecosystem of people living the problem that need to fix it. So similar to what Chris did with the NHL and the app, that's the kind of business I am on a daily business, except not necessarily in digital, like Chris is, but in many other areas of policy making, creating experiences for students at the University of Ottawa that are better than what they are now, and things like that. So I used a design thinking philosophy to this project. And so what I decided to do was do a mini ethnographic research initiative. So this kind of work involves immersing yourself in a community, understanding and asking questions, listening, and listening even more, and then capturing qualitative insights. So how did I get my interview subjects so quickly? Well, first of all, I've lived in this space for over a decade. So the reach of minor hockey extends tremendously in places you would never even think of. But I use social media, my personal networks, referrals, and I did cold calls to find people to interview who talked to me. And more importantly, it was really interesting to know who didn't. Here's my ecosystem. This is my mind map. When I sat down and Mike said to me, okay, you're in, you've got 20 minutes, I went, oh my God, what am I going to say? So I mapped out who I wanted to talk to. And you can see it's quite an extensive ecosystem. And all roads lead back to minor hockey. Whether you're in the NHL, whether you play Olympic hockey for women, overseas, you're a coach, everything comes back to minor hockey. So here's my results. Probably one of the few slides you'll see with numbers. First, I have over 50 hours logged, over 50 hours of interviews, over 300 plus pages of handwritten notes, with hundreds of insights. Everyone who talked to me, it was a confidential conversation. So I sent out 64 interview requests to that ecosystem I just showed you. I completed 38 interviews. On average, each of these interviews was an hour in length. Some of them were 2 or 3 hours. There was a handful. Because once we started talking and I started listening, people wanted to unload and unleash their ideas. And I did this in 20 business days. So as a parent of a competitive team member and a former elite player said to me, will it be less fun for the kids who love to feel the wind in their hair if they're exposed to data analytics? So here's what I heard. I identified 14 threads of areas that were interesting and repeating themselves in the conversations. And I grouped these into 3 themes. The first theme is called the game. In it, there are threads about using analytics in minor hockey, access, implementing minor hockey analytics on teams, as coaches, as parents, as players. A little bit of talk about sensors. Development was huge. And gender, which I didn't have enough time to unpack. So I really appreciated the podcast this morning. It was great. The second theme was framework. So what's the infrastructure around minor hockey data analytics that needs to be unpacked? finances, the cost, safety, I can get into that a little later, guidelines on how to use it, and ethics and legal ramifications. And then thirdly, my third theme is business. So looking at the industry, looking at innovation in the space, looking at the culture of minor hockey, and growth. So as NCAA player said to me recently, analytics are a confidence burst or bust. You don't use it in house league, I was told. It takes creativity out of the game. Analytics will create a subculture that is worse than today, fostering many more backdoor and under-the-table deals. So here's the first thing, the game. So I picked out the 3 things that resonated for me in the conversations. Here they are. 1, context is missing. There's no decision-making context offered, typically. And remember, we're talking about minor hockey. Heavy subjectivity and strong bias in collection of data analysis, while questioning accuracy and credibility of current systems. Point streak was absolutely maligned in these conversations. And so was iceberg. Secondly, the whole transparency debate. There are mixed reviews of revealing full performance on ice at the house of competitive levels. One of the reoccurring themes was, well, hey, this will help my D guy, my D, get better noticed on the team for performing and producing actual work. So he or she doesn't get the glory of being a forward and scoring a lot of goals, which show up on point streak, but now maybe it'll be more transparent for everyone to see what kind of contribution he or she makes. And then the third issue that came up was this whole idea called development integration. And that's very abundant, that it's not clear how analytics integrate into the whole idea of development that Hockey Canada has put on the table as a way of moving forward in this space. And also, there is absolutely no clue about how to work in this space for fair and equal play. Everybody with me so far? Yeah? So we don't need facial recognition files stored on the Russian server. We spend more to spend more. And guidance won't come until a negative event happens in order to make real change, said an AHL coach to me. So here's 2, the framework. So as I mentioned, finance, safety, guidelines, and legal ethics and legality of doing this. We're talking about minor kids. And traditionally a volunteer sport, which costs a lot of money, trust me, I know. So the 3 points I want to raise here are, the first one is the cost pain point. A lot of people say, well, after I kind of explain what it looks like it could be like, they said, well, it's too expensive. There's no demonstrated business value to the team players or families for me to actually want to pay more of my team fees. Second part was, well, what about this whole issue of the data governance side of things? I didn't use those words because most people don't get that. I said, what? Who owns the data? Are you happy if someone else owns the data? Or what do you think about it? What do you think? Who do you think owns the data? And when we started talking and listening, parents especially were extremely concerned about how data was collected, who owned the data, where it was stored, and the sale of that information. And interestingly enough, the best comment I got on the question of sale of information came from a 12-year-old AA player here in the Ottawa region. And he basically said, well, you're going to sell the data. I want my take. Okay? And the final thing which came through very strongly and clearly in this space was guidance and training. People want simple, clear, and credible guidelines and training for use of data analytics as coaches, parents, and players. But they don't want to pay for it anymore, and they don't want to eat up their volunteer time to do it. It's quite the paradigm. Love this quote. Companies provide horseshit data. It's hocus pocus and voodoo link. And this comes from one of the premier minor hockey inventors in the analytics space that you all have never heard of. And I can talk to you about his circuit theory a little bit later in questions if you want. So we put kids into an environment where we measure performance and perfection, but they can't measure whether they are thriving. And that's unfair. That was a two-time Canadian Olympian who said that. Hockey IQ might decrease and produce less of an athlete when someone else is thinking for you. A really smart women's competitive coach. And of course, you don't need it to play hockey. Which leads me to my third theme. And this is pretty much of an interest, for me it's a really interesting area, and the whole question of disruptive technologies, applications in minor sport, and particularly in minor hockey. So the first point is, hockey analytics startups. You're starting to see more of them. Remember, we're talking about the minor hockey space. But they're offering weak analytical service offerings and service client servicing to those minor hockey teams that are sort of skirting around this issue and wanting to try and experiment. Most of those teams that have been exposed to certain types of analytical platforms, they don't understand them. They don't understand how to use them, they don't understand where the data is going, they just don't understand. And the companies aren't offering them those services. It's hard to get access to data analytics. Person who actually talk to you as a human. I know, I've tried. And so what's going to happen is, I think there's going to be a creation of a new set of companies around this space that are going to step into that void and help those parents and those coaches actually interpret and understand what they're looking at. So you know how we have skills coaches for skating? We'll have analytics coaches for analytics. Guaranteed. The second point I want to raise is in-house innovation. So I observe that there's a really strong culture of basic in-house statistical collection, innovation by coaches, and stats parents. So the circuit board system I described. Everybody has their own way of doing it. And when you introduce something new and different, like this digital stuff, people step back and they go, how is that going to affect what I know and what I do and how I do it best? This is particularly coming from coaches. So can the paper and the eye test meet those homemade systems, and are those homemade systems able to deal with the technology influx that's coming? And then finally, not finally, but on this slide, is the mental health culture. There's significant concern about introducing and pressurizing kids more by putting them in front of data pools and these systems where it's not understood how the data is going to be used and communicated and conveyed to those students, to those players, never mind the parents. I love this photo. This is in Montreal. So what do I believe? I agree with this athlete. We need to involve athletes in their own development. And I believe that starts at a very early age. So what do I think should happen? Well, first I think we should reimagine the minor hockey experience. It's got to be joyful for that entire life cycle for the child. Recognizing that technology and disruptive technologies are coming to affect how the game is played, affect the culture of the game, and affect the impact of how these children feel about themselves moving forward through a really brutal system that cuts them essentially off if you're a boy at 13. The second thing is, I think we need to not just, and I've said this as well, understand the impact of disruptive technologies. We need to understand what it means to introduce data analytics into minor hockey. What does that mean from a behavioral standpoint for kids? How does it affect their mental health? How does it make the relationships better between parents on a team, which can be caustic and toxic to begin with? And it's not just data analytics. It's virtual reality, it's gamification on steroids, it's all of this stuff that is bombarding our kids, and even more so, I'm looking at Chris and picking on you, Chris, when the NHL starts broadcasting how fast the puck goes and all of those data analytics around the favorite teams. What kind of trickle-down effect is that going to have on hockey? Just think about that. And then, of course, he asks the question, where's Hockey Canada in all of this? It's not very clear. But what is clear is that people are looking for guidance, they're looking for a way to navigate this new world. And if it's not given to them, that new world will take them over. And then that one timer I put on the slide at the beginning of actually making a difference and getting ahead of this tsunami is going to be lost. So what I think, well, hockey has given me my children tremendous opportunities, heartaches, lots of fun, new friends, but I've also spent a lot of money. So I'd like to get that money back. So I think that the NHL should put forward a $25 million Disruptive Technologies Impact Fund for minor hockey. And what that would do is it would redesign a minor hockey experience, plus you would prototype the use of this new experience and disruptive technologies in minor hockey. So you'd have a safe sandbox to try this stuff out. Secondly, Canada, the granting councils should set aside $20 million to create a program for interdisciplinary research into the impact of disruptive technologies of minor sport. And then finally, I think Hockey Canada should set aside $5 million to create a disruptive technologies learner program where you would actually create guidelines, co-create guidelines with the very people who need to work in them. And you'd also create a learner program that will help teach coaches, players, and parents, and those interested in hockey and disruptive technologies some basic information. Am I almost done? Do I have one more minute?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
We have time for one or two questions. Yes?
Sure, yeah. I'm not familiar with the minor hockey system really at all, so I'm not really familiar with the minor hockey system. So my question is, what are the laws of legislation around any data collected at these games? Like, is there any legislation at all, or are there any standards like the governing bodies that dictate what happens to this data? Like, does that exist in any form?
Well, you're assuming the association's no data is being collected. Right. And so the only data that I come across where I sign a waiver is a photo permission form. So as a photographer, I get that, but I have no clue if anyone is sitting there on hockey TV scraping my kids' video. Well, I know for two of them they are, scraping up my 12-year-old's video and doing something with it, because it's a public space in the arena. Right.
Oh, yes. Dawson in the back.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll bring the microphone to you. One second.
Yeah, so I have some personal experience, just more with minor hockey. I came up through the Toronto competitive circuit, playing high level. My brother's all video with me, still playing in it. And I think there's a lot of important stuff. I'm curious how much of this is distinct to hockey analytics versus just minor hockey in general. Like, are they doing, I can see a lot of hockey analytics who say if those slides would apply if I just said the word coaching. Like, there's mistrust of coaching stats, not just mistrust of analytics. As coaches being applied properly, people, there's a lot of, and I know it's a big thing, the tracking and stuff at that level, because, Tommy's dad writes down all the stats, and Tommy doesn't like Bobby, so Bobby doesn't get the second assist on his goals, and he's not going to go to college because of it or something like that. But it's like, these are like the type of things that come up in minor hockey. And so how much of this do you think is unique to hockey analytics, and how much do you think is more just a minor hockey problem?
Well, first of all, I did this in 20 days, so these things typically take a year to get into and do properly, so, as I said, it's highly unscientific. I think that's a really good question to ask, and that's the kind of question you need to sort of dig deeper in and do a proper assessment of. I know that, I can tell you right now that people don't know about this kind of technology applied in the system, but the kids see it around them when they play NHL 2020 or whatever. I mean, can't you just imagine an NHL 2020 customized for your own stats as a 10-year-old for Christmas, and then inserting yourself into the game that way? Or maybe there's a Leafs and a Canadiens game on Hockey Night in Canada minus Don Cherry, of course, and somehow you subscribe into that system, and you can actually be the seventh man on the ice by physically playing or creating some sort of gamified experience for that child. So if they're seeing it and having that kind of influence from media marketing and the big game and the big show, then it's going to impact them somehow, and we just don't know how. And just to finish up, I actually talked to a number of people who are not in hockey. And it's the same kind of thinking around the introduction of this kind of technology into minor sports in general. And so it's a great question, and I think it needs more study.
We have time for one more. Is in the back corner there?
Okay.
Hello? Wonderful. Do you think the introduction of analytics into like a minor hockey system would kind of ruin the fun of the game? Because a lot of like minor hockey programs are experiencing a progression in like enlistment, sorry. And I think a full introduction of analytics would kind of increase its already like growing professionalism in the minor hockey game. So like, what's your take on that?
Sorry, can you repeat your question? I couldn't hear you. Can you stand up so I can see you actually, please? Thanks. So what was the question again?
How do you think analytics would increase the professionalism of an already like increasingly professional minor hockey system in Canada? Because if you go into most rinks and you see like PB or midget like advanced hockey players, they're sometimes with like a skills coach alone on an ice, and they don't look like they're enjoying themselves. So I think an introduction of analytics would be kind of counterproductive to what is already like a falling sport. Like, what would my question is essentially, do you think analytics would make the game more professional, like at a younger level?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer for that. I mean, what is professional, and at what point do you introduce analytics? You know, between a kid who's 6 or 5 in Timbits, and you know, a kid who's 17 on their way out, and they're if you're lucky if they're playing house at that point, because they haven't made it to the NHL. So that's a good question, but I don't know what the answer is.
All right, thank you very much. That's all the time we have for now.
Thank you.